The river's rage claimed everything but her will to live. Half buried in the muddy banks of the Colorado, Helena Armstrong lay motionless, her soaked dress weighing her down like an anchor to the mortal world. She might have stayed there until her last breath if not for the keen eyes of Preston Xavier, a rancher who'd only meant to water his horse at daybreak. It was May of 1875, and Montezuma, Colorado, had seen 3 weeks of relentless rain. The San Miguel River, usually a gentle presence winding through the small mining settlement, had transformed into a vengeful deity swallowing cabins and dreams with equal disregard. Preston dismounted his chestnut mare, Penny, the moment he spotted what appeared to be a bundle of fabric caught against a partially submerged log. The rising sun cast just enough light for him to discern the unmistakable shape of a woman's arm extending from the mass. Without hesitation, he waded into the cold water, his worn leather boots filling instantly. "Lord Almighty," he whispered as he reached her. Her face was pale as moonlight, lips blue, hair plastered to her face in dark tendrils. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, finding the faintest flutter of a pulse. Preston lifted her with surprising gentleness for a man who spent his days wrangling cattle and breaking horses. Her body was limp, head lolling against his shoulder as he carried her to shore. Laying her carefully on the grassy bank, he noted the absence of breath. "Not today, miss," he muttered, positioning her head and pinching her nose. He pressed his mouth to hers and breathed steadily, recalling how he'd once saved a fellow ranch hand who'd been kicked in the chest by a stallion. After several breaths, he pressed firmly on her chest again and again, refusing to accept defeat. Water suddenly spilled from her mouth as she convulsed, coughing violently. Preston turned her onto her side, supporting her as she expelled the river from her lungs. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they were the color of storm clouds, disoriented and afraid. "Easy now," he soothed, his voice low and steady like he was calming a spooked colt. "You're safe." "Where?" She struggled to form words, her voice raw. "River nearly claimed you. I'm Preston Xavier." "My ranch is just over that ridge." He gestured vaguely without taking his eyes off her. "Can you tell me your name, miss?" "Helena," she managed before another fit of coughing overtook her. "Helena Armstrong." Preston nodded, noting the eastern lilt to her accent. "Well, Miss Armstrong, we need to get you warm and seen by a doctor. Can you stand?" When she tried and immediately collapsed, Preston made a swift decision. He lifted her again and placed her atop Penny, then mounted behind her, keeping one arm securely around her waist as they rode toward his property. The Xavier Ranch was modest compared to some in the territory, but Preston had built it with his own hands over the past 5 years, since arriving from Texas. The main house was solid pine, with a wide porch and 3 bedrooms, far more space than a bachelor needed, but he'd had hopes when he designed it. As they approached, his foreman, Samuel Wilkins, came running from the barn. "Boss." "What in tarnation, Sam? Ride for Doc Pearson," Preston commanded, already dismounting and reaching up for Helena. "Found her half drowned in the river, and send Martha from the cookhouse up to the main house." "Yes, sir," Sam replied, already heading for his horse. Inside, Preston carried Helena to the guest bedroom, where Martha, a matronly woman who'd been with him since he established the ranch, quickly took charge. "Out with you, Mr. Xavier," she ordered. "I'll get her out of these wet clothes." Preston retreated to the kitchen, stoking the fire and putting on water for coffee. His mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? How had she ended up in the river? She wore no wedding ring, but her hands, though delicate, showed signs of work. Not a society lady, but educated, judging by her brief speech. An hour later, Dr. Pearson arrived, a portly man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. After examining Helena, he joined Preston in the kitchen. "She's lucky you found her when you did," the doctor said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Another few minutes and we'd be having a different conversation. She's suffering from exhaustion and exposure, but I don't believe there's any permanent damage to her lungs. Martha's with her now, she's sleeping." "Any idea how she ended up there?" The doctor shook his head. "She was too weak to say much. Perhaps tomorrow." He fixed Preston with a scrutinizing gaze. "She mentioned someone named Thomas, kept asking if he'd been found." Preston frowned. "There was no one else there." "Well, she needs rest and warmth for at least a few days. I'll return tomorrow." The doctor paused. "Preston, you know how people talk. It might be wise to have Martha stay here while your guest recovers." Preston nodded, understanding the implication. A single man housing an unmarried woman would set tongues wagging in Montezuma faster than a wildfire in August. That night, Preston found himself unable to sleep, rising several times to check on his guest. Each time, Martha shooed him away with assurances that Helena was resting comfortably. It was nearly noon the following day when Helena finally awoke fully. Preston was repairing a bridle at the kitchen table when Martha appeared. "She's asking for you," Martha said. "Seems more lucid today." Preston found Helena propped up against pillows, her dark hair brushed and braided, wearing one of Martha's nightgowns. The color had returned to her face, though dark shadows lingered beneath her eyes. "Mr. Xavier," she said, her voice stronger than the day before, "I owe you my life." "No need for thanks," he replied, suddenly awkward. He'd faced down rustlers and blizzards without flinching, but this woman's direct gaze unnerved him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," she admitted with a small smile. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." Preston pulled a chair near the bed. "Miss Armstrong, if you don't mind my asking, how did you come to be in the river?" Helena's expression darkened. "The stage-coach. We were crossing when the bridge gave way." Her hands twisted in the blanket. "There were 5 of us. The driver, a businessman from Denver, an elderly couple, and—" Her voice faltered. "My brother Thomas." Preston's heart sank. "I'm sorry, I didn't see anyone else." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was holding his hand when the coach went in. The current, it was so strong, he slipped away from me." She looked up, desperation etching her features. "Has anyone searched downstream? He could have survived." Preston doubted it, having seen firsthand the river's fury, but he couldn't bring himself to extinguish her hope. "I'll ask around town. The sheriff might know if anyone else was found." "We were coming from Boston," Helena continued, as if needing to tell her story. "Our parents died last winter, influenza. The family business failed and we lost everything. Thomas heard about opportunities out west. He's only 20, but so determined." Her voice broke on the last word. Preston couldn't help but admire her composure despite everything. "Rest now. I'll ride into town and see what I can find out." In Montezuma, Preston found Sheriff Lloyd Barker at his desk, a harried expression on his weathered face. "Xavier," the sheriff greeted him. "Heard you pulled a woman from the river." "She doing all right. She'll recover," Preston confirmed. "She says she was on the stage-coach that went in upriver. Her brother was with her." The sheriff's expression turned grim. "We found the coach about 2 miles downstream, smashed to kindling. Driver's body washed up near Miller's Creek. Old couple to the Hendersons on their way to visit their son in Durango. Businessman was identified as James Coleman." He shook his head. "No sign of a young man, though. The lady says his name is Thomas Armstrong, about 20 years old." Sheriff Barker made a note. "I'll keep an eye out, but—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Preston nodded grimly. "I understand." On his way back to the ranch, Preston stopped at Montezuma's small general store. The owner's wife, Mrs. Holbrook, helped him select a few necessities for Helena, a simple dress, undergarments, and toiletries. "For the poor you rescued," Mrs. Holbrook said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity as she wrapped the items. "Such a tragic thing. Will she be staying with you long?" "Just until she's well enough to travel," Preston replied non-committally, aware that every word would be repeated across town before sunset. When he returned to the ranch, he found Helena seated in a rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in a quilt despite the warm afternoon. Her face fell as he approached. "You didn't find him," she said, reading his expression. Preston sat beside her, placing the package from the store on a small table. "The sheriff hasn't found anyone matching Thomas's description, but that doesn't mean—" "Please," she interrupted, "don't offer false hope. I can see it in your eyes." A single tear traced down her cheek. "He's gone, isn't he?" Preston wished he could lie, but couldn't bring himself to do it. "The river's still high, if he was carried further downstream." He trailed off, then gently covered her hand with his. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Armstrong." Helena nodded, her grief palpable but contained. "Thank you for asking." She gestured to the distant mountains, their peaks still snow-capped in the late spring. "It's beautiful here. Thomas would have loved it." They sat in silence as the sun began its descent, painting the Colorado sky in hues of orange and purple. Preston found himself studying her profile, struck by her quiet strength. "I've brought you some things from town," he finally said, indicating the package. "And we should discuss what comes next. You're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered, of course." "That's very kind, but I have no money to pay you." Helena's directness surprised him again. "Everything we had was in our luggage on the coach." "I'm not concerned about payment," Preston assured her. "But I should know, is there anyone I should contact? Family back east?" Helena shook her head. "There's no one. Thomas and I were all that remained of the Armstrongs." She straightened, her chin lifting slightly. "Once I'm well, I'll find work. I won't impose on your charity longer than necessary." Preston felt a mixture of admiration and concern. "And what sort of work might that be?" "I was a teacher in Boston," she replied. "But I can sew, cook reasonably well, and keep accounts. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Xavier." "Please call me Preston." He smiled slightly. "And I don't doubt your work ethic, Miss Armstrong, but Montezuma is a mining town. Opportunities for a lady of your background are limited." "Helena," she corrected. "And I'm adaptable." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Pearson, who pronounced Helena's recovery remarkable but insisted on several more days of rest. After his departure, Martha served a simple dinner, and Helena, exhausted by the day's emotions, retired early. Late that night, Preston was awakened by sounds of distress. Following the muffled sobs to Helena's room, he knocked gently. "Helena, are you all right?" When there was no answer beyond continued crying, he cautiously opened the door. She sat upright in bed, clearly in the grip of a nightmare, eyes open but unseeing. "Thomas," she cried, reaching out as if to grasp someone. "I can't hold on, Helena," Preston said firmly, moving to her side. "Wake up, you're dreaming." Her eyes focused suddenly, recognition dawning as she saw him. "Preston, you were having a nightmare," he explained, keeping a respectful distance. Helena pressed a hand to her mouth, embarrassed. "I'm sorry I disturbed you. No need for apologies." He hesitated. "Would you like me to bring you some tea? Martha leaves a kettle by the fire." She nodded, and he returned minutes later with a steaming cup. As she sipped it, her hands steadied. "I keep seeing him," she confessed. "The moment the current took him, his face," her voice caught. Preston sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed. "My brother died at Gettysburg," he said quietly. "For years, I dreamed of reaching him across the battlefield, but never getting there in time." Helena looked up, surprised by this personal revelation. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "Not entirely," Preston admitted. But eventually, you remember the good times more than the end. They talked until Helena's eyelids grew heavy, Preston sharing stories of his own journey west after the war, how he'd worked cattle drives before saving enough to buy his land. She told him about growing up in Boston, her father's shipping business, and Thomas's dreams of adventure. As days turned into a week, Helena's strength returned. She insisted on helping Martha with household tasks, initially to the older woman's dismay, though they soon developed a comfortable rhythm. Preston often found them laughing together in the kitchen, or with heads bent over mending. One afternoon, Preston returned from checking fence lines to find Helena in the barn, tentatively petting Penny's nose. "She likes you," he observed, hanging up his tack. Helena smiled. "She's beautiful. Do you have many horses?" "A dozen or so," Preston replied. "Do you ride?" "Not since I was a girl. Father thought it unladylike once I turned 16. Preston considered this. "Would you like to learn again? Once Doc Pearson gives his approval, of course." The genuine delight that transformed her face caught him by surprise. "I would love that," she said. 2 days later, Preston led a gentle mare named Daisy from the corral as Helena watched from the fence. She wore the simple blue dress he'd purchased, her hair braided and pinned up beneath a borrowed hat. "Daisy here is patient with beginners," he explained, bringing the horse to where Helena stood. "She won't take advantage of you." Helena stroked the mare's neck. "Hello, beautiful girl." Preston adjusted the stirrups for her height, then demonstrated how to mount. When it was Helena's turn, she gathered her skirts modestly and placed her foot in his cupped hands, settling into the saddle with more grace than he expected. "It's coming back to me," she said, gathering the reins as he instructed. They spent the afternoon riding at a walk around the pasture, Preston leading Daisy at first, then letting Helena guide the mare herself. Her confidence grew visibly, and by the time they returned to the barn, her cheeks were flushed with exertion and pleasure. "Thank you," she said as he helped her dismount, her hands resting briefly on his shoulders. "I'd forgotten how freeing it feels." Their eyes met as her feet touched the ground, and Preston became acutely aware of her closeness, the scent of sunshine in her hair. He stepped back, clearing his throat. "You're a natural," he said, turning to unsaddle Daisy. "We can ride again tomorrow if you'd like." That evening after dinner, Preston broached a subject he'd been considering. "Helena, I have a proposition for you." She looked up from her needlework, eyebrows raised. "My foreman's wife, Sarah Wilkins, is expecting their 3rd child," he explained. "She's been teaching the children on nearby ranches, about a dozen altogether, but the doctors ordered bed rest for her final months." Helena's eyes brightened with understanding. "You need a teacher," Preston nodded. "It's not a proper school, just lessons 3 days a week in the old bunkhouse we've fixed up. The pay isn't much, but there's genuine need." "I would be honored," Helena said without hesitation. "When can I meet Mrs. Wilkins to discuss what the children have been learning?" 2 days later, Preston drove Helena in his wagon to the Wilkins cabin at the edge of his property. Sarah Wilkins, a cheerful woman despite her obviously advanced pregnancy, welcomed Helena warmly. "The children will be thrilled," Sarah said as they reviewed her lesson books. "Most of their parents barely had schooling themselves, so they're determined their little ones will do better." Helena nodded. "I understand completely. Education changes lives." As they left the Wilkins home, Preston noticed Helena's thoughtful expression. "Having second thoughts?" "Not at all," she assured him. "I'm just realizing how different my life will be from what I expected." She gazed across the valley stretching before them. "A month ago I was in Boston, packing for what I thought would be a new start with Thomas. Now he's gone and I'm here, about to teach in a converted bunkhouse." She smiled wryly. "Life has a way of surprising us." That it does, Preston agreed, thinking of his own winding path to Colorado. The following Monday, Helena began teaching. Preston rode with her the first day, watching with admiration as she quickly won over the skeptical children. Her natural authority and genuine interest in each child soon had even the most reluctant students engaged. By June, Helena had settled into a routine, teaching Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays and helping around the ranch on her off days. She insisted on paying Preston a small amount for her room and board from her teaching wages, and though he protested, he recognized her need for independence. One Saturday, Preston suggested they ride to a mesa overlooking the valley, bringing a picnic lunch Martha had prepared. The day was perfect clear skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. As they sat on a blanket enjoying cold chicken and biscuits, Helena surveyed the landscape below. "It's magnificent," she said. "So different from the city." Preston nodded. "First time I saw this valley, I knew I'd found home." "You've built something remarkable," Helena said sincerely. "Your ranch, your life here, it's a testament to your character." Preston felt uncharacteristically self-conscious under her praise. "I've been fortunate." "It's more than fortune," Helena insisted. "You create your own opportunities, help others when you can. The children adore you, you know. They're always telling me stories about Mr. Xavier teaching them to lasso or showing them animal tracks." Preston chuckled. "Children are easily impressed." "Perhaps," Helena conceded, "but they're excellent judges of character." As they packed up to leave, Helena wandered to the edge of the mesa, gazing toward the river that had nearly claimed her life. Preston joined her, noticing the shadow that crossed her face. "You're thinking of Thomas," he observed quietly. She nodded. "I wonder if I'll ever stop looking for him whenever I see the river." She turned to Preston, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for bringing me here today. It helps to see beauty again." Impulsively, Preston reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. As summer progressed, Helena became a fixture in Preston's life and home. Martha, initially wary of having another woman in her kitchen, now delighted in Helena's company, teaching her Western cooking techniques while Helena shared Eastern recipes. Preston found himself looking forward to evenings on the porch, where he and Helena would often sit after dinner, discussing books, sharing stories, or simply enjoying comfortable silence. Occasionally, she would read aloud, her voice bringing to life the novels she'd brought west in her trunk, now recovered from the stagecoach wreckage, though water damaged. Word of the schoolmarm staying at Xavier's ranch spread through Montezuma, and while some gossiped, most accepted the arrangement as practical, especially after seeing Helena's dedication to teaching their children. In late July, Helena approached Preston after dinner, a determined set to her jaw. "I've decided it's time I found my own accommodations in town," she announced. "Mrs. Holbrook mentioned a room above the millinery that's available." Preston felt an unexpected pang at her words. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you wish," he said. "The arrangement seems to be working well." "It is," Helena agreed, "but I need to establish myself independently. People talk, Preston. I don't want my presence to cause difficulties for you." "Let them talk," Preston replied, surprising himself with his vehemence. "Your reputation is intact. Martha sees to that, and I care little for gossip." Helena studied him, her expression softening. "It's not just about appearances. I need to know I can stand on my own, especially after." She didn't need to finish. Preston nodded reluctantly. "I understand, but the offer remains open." The following Sunday, Preston escorted Helena to church services where she was introduced to more community members. Afterward, several parents approached to thank her for her work with their children, As they were leaving, Sheriff Barker hurried over. "Miss Armstrong, Mr. Xavier, glad I caught you." Preston noticed the paper in the sheriff's hand. "News." "Telegraph from Denver," the sheriff confirmed, handing it to Helena. "Response to our inquiries about your brother." Helena's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Her eyes widened as she read. "They found him," she whispered, looking up at Preston in disbelief. "Thomas is alive." Preston's heart leapt for her, even as a conflicting emotion he couldn't immediately identify surfaced. "Where is he?" "A homesteader found him nearly 20 miles downstream," Helena read, her voice gaining strength. "He was badly injured but survived. He's been recovering in a hospital in Grand Junction." "That's wonderful news," Preston said sincerely, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "The telegraph office can arrange transportation if you wish to go to him," Sheriff Barker added. Helena looked to Preston, her expression a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "I should go to him as soon as possible." "Of course," Preston agreed, ignoring the hollow feeling in his chest. "I'll take you to Grand Junction myself." They departed 2 days later, after Helena had explained the situation to her students and arranged for Sarah Wilkins's sister to cover her classes. The journey to Grand Junction took 3 days by wagon, with nights spent at roadside inns where Preston was careful to secure separate rooms to protect Helena's reputation. During the journey, Helena alternated between excited anticipation and quiet reflection. On their final evening, as they sat in a small hotel dining room, she finally voiced the question that had been building. "What will you do when I leave with Thomas?" she asked directly. "About the school, I mean." Preston had been avoiding this very thought. "We'll manage," he said, more curtly than intended. Seeing her hurt expression, he softened his tone. "I'm sorry. The truth is, you've become indispensable, Helena, to the children, to the ranch, to me." The last words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "I don't know what Thomas's plans will be," Helena said carefully, "but I've grown fond of Montezuma, of teaching, of—" She met his eyes briefly before looking away. "Then perhaps you'll consider returning," Preston suggested, hope rising despite his efforts to temper it. "Perhaps," she agreed, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The Grand Junction Hospital was a modest building near the town center. When they inquired about Thomas Armstrong, a nurse led them to a small ward where several men were recuperating. "Thomas!" Helena cried, rushing to a bed where a young man sat propped against pillows, his right leg elevated and splinted, one arm bandaged. Though pale and thinner than in health, the family resemblance was unmistakable, the same storm cloud eyes, the same determined set to the jaw. Thomas's face lit up at the sight of his sister. "Helena, thank God," he exclaimed as she embraced him carefully. "When I woke here, I was certain you had drowned." "I nearly did," Helena replied, tears flowing freely. "Mr. Xavier saved my life." She turned, gesturing Preston forward. "Thomas, this is Preston Xavier. He found me in the river and has shown me extraordinary kindness." Thomas extended his good hand. "Sir, I am forever in your debt," he said with genuine emotion. "Helena is all the family I have left." Preston shook the offered hand. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Thomas disagreed. "And certainly not everyone would have opened their home to a stranger." The doctor arrived shortly after, explaining Thomas's injuries: a broken leg, fractured arm, and severe pneumonia from his time in the river. "He's healing well, but I wouldn't recommend travel for at least another 2 weeks," the doctor advised. "The leg needs more time to strengthen." Helena turned to Preston, concern evident. "I can't ask you to stay away from your ranch for so long." "You don't need to ask," Preston replied. "I'll find accommodation in town and help however I can." Over the next few days, Preston assisted Helena in securing a small room at a boarding house near the hospital, where she could stay to care for her brother. Though he told himself he would return to Montezuma, something kept him in Grand Junction, taking a room at a nearby hotel. He visited daily, often bringing books or newspapers to entertain Thomas during his recovery. The young man proved to be intelligent and thoughtful, with a quick wit that reminded Preston of Helena. As Thomas's strength returned, so did his curiosity about Preston's ranch and life in Montezuma. "Helena tells me you run a successful cattle operation," Thomas said one afternoon as Preston played checkers with him. "I know little about ranching, but I'm a quick study." "It's hard work," Preston acknowledged, "but rewarding." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Before all this, I had grand plans for us in Denver, a mercantile business. But now," he gestured to his healing leg, "I'm reconsidering everything. Helena seems happy in Montezuma with her teaching." "The children adore her," Preston confirmed. "She has a gift." Thomas studied him shrewdly. "And what about you, Mr. Xavier? Do you adore my sister as well?" Preston nearly knocked over the checkerboard. "I respect her greatly," he answered carefully. Thomas laughed. "Your face says more than your words, sir. I've seen how you look at her when you think no one notices." Before Preston could respond, Helena returned with fresh bandages from the hospital supply room. The conversation shifted, but Thomas's knowing smile lingered. Later that evening, as Preston walked Helena back to her boarding house, she seemed unusually quiet. "Thomas is improving quickly," Preston observed. "The doctor thinks he might be ready to travel within the week." Helena nodded. "Yes, he's eager to be mobile again." She hesitated, then added, "He's been asking about opportunities in Montezuma." Preston felt a surge of hope. "There's always need for hard-working men. What skills does he have?" "He worked in our father's shipping office, keeping accounts mainly." Helena smiled fondly. "He's very organized, good with figures." "Montezuma's bank might have a position," Preston suggested. "Or he could work for one of the mining companies. They always need clerks." They reached the boarding house steps, and Helena turned to face him. "Preston, She seemed to struggle for words. "These past months I've come to value your friendship immensely." "As I value yours," he replied, sensing there was more she wanted to say. But she simply nodded, wished him good night, and disappeared inside, leaving Preston with the unsettling feeling that something important had been left unsaid. The next morning, Preston arrived at the hospital to find Thomas alone, looking troubled. "Helena's gone to purchase supplies," Thomas explained. "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk." Preston sat, immediately concerned by the young man's serious tone. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," Thomas said carefully, "but I need to understand your intentions toward my sister." Preston hadn't expected such directness. "My intentions?" "Yes, Mr. Xavier. Helena may think I'm blind, but I see how you look at each other." Thomas leaned forward. "She's been through enough loss. I won't see her heart broken." "I would never intentionally hurt her," Preston assured him. "Intentionally, no, but she tells me you saved her life, gave her purpose when she had none. It would be natural for her to confuse gratitude with deeper feelings." Preston felt his defenses rise. "I assure you, I've never taken advantage of her vulnerability." "I believe you," Thomas said. "But when we leave Grand Junction, what then? Will you court her properly, or will you let her go without telling her how you feel?" The question struck Preston like a physical blow. In truth, he hadn't allowed himself to fully consider what Helena's departure would mean. The thought of his ranch without her presence left an emptiness he couldn't ignore. "I care for her deeply," Preston admitted finally. "But her future should be her choice, not influenced by any obligation she might feel toward me." Thomas studied him thoughtfully. "A noble sentiment, but perhaps you underestimate my sister's ability to know her own mind." Their conversation was interrupted by Helena's return. She looked between them curiously. "Why do you both look so serious?" "Just men's talk," Thomas replied lightly. "Preston was telling me about cattle prices." That evening, as Preston lay awake in his hotel room, Thomas's words echoed in his mind. Had he truly developed feelings for Helena that went beyond friendship and concern? The answer, he realized, was undeniably yes. Somewhere between pulling her from the river and their quiet evenings on the porch, Helena Armstrong had claimed a place in his heart he thought long closed. The question remained. What should he do about it? 3 days later, the doctor declared Thomas fit for travel, though he would need to use crutches for several more weeks. As they prepared to depart Grand Junction, Preston suggested they break the journey with a night's stay at his ranch before continuing to Montezuma proper. "I'd like to see this ranch I've heard so much about," Thomas agreed readily. During the journey back, Helena rode beside Preston on the wagon seat, while Thomas, still requiring a comfortable position for his healing leg, rested in the wagon bed on a makeshift pallet. The siblings talked animatedly about their options in Montezuma, with Thomas expressing interest in both banking and the possibility of starting a small mercantile business. "There's real opportunity in supplying the mines," he noted. "And from what Helena tells me, the town is growing steadily." Preston confirmed this assessment, all the while acutely aware of Helena beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his as the wagon jolted over rough patches. They arrived at the Xavier Ranch late the following afternoon. Martha greeted Helena with a warm embrace, then fussed over Thomas, immediately declaring him too thin and promising a substantial dinner. Samuel Wilkins helped settle Thomas in the guest room while Helena went to freshen up in what Preston still thought of as her room, though she'd been gone for nearly 3 weeks. After dinner, Thomas retired early, still easily fatigued from his injuries. Preston found Helena on the porch, gazing at the stars that shone brilliantly in the clear mountain air. "I miss this view," she said as he joined her. "Grand Junction has its charms, but nothing compares to this sky." "The ranch missed you," Preston replied, then added more softly, "I missed you." Helena turned to him, her expression serious in the lamplight from the window. "Preston, I need to tell you something," he nodded, suddenly apprehensive. "Thomas wants to stay in Montezuma," she began. "He believes there's opportunity here, a chance to rebuild our lives." "That's wonderful news," Preston said, genuinely pleased. "He's a bright young man, he'll do well here." "Yes, I believe he will." Helena took a deep breath. "He's also concerned about me," Preston tensed. "In what way?" "He thinks I may have developed attachments here that influenced my desire to return." Her eyes met his directly. "He's not wrong." The admission hung between them, pregnant with possibility. "Helena," Preston began, stepping closer, "I've been thinking a great deal about what happens next. When I found you in that river, I was only doing what any decent man would do. I never expected," he paused, gathering his thoughts. "I never expected you would become so essential to my happiness." Helena's eyes widened. "Preston, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know you came west with different dreams, different plans, but I find myself hoping those plans might now include me." He took her hand in his. "I care for you deeply, Helena, more than I thought possible after so many years alone." Tears glistened in Helena's eyes. "When Thomas was found, I felt such joy, but also fear," she confessed. "Fear that I would have to choose between my brother and the life I'd begun to build here with you." "You don't have to choose," Preston assured her. "There's room in Montezuma for both your futures." "Is there room in your life for me?" Helena asked directly. Not as someone you rescued or as your children's teacher, but as a woman you might someday. She couldn't finish, her courage faltering. Preston stepped closer, gently lifting her chin until their eyes met. There has been room in my heart for you since the moment you opened your eyes on that riverbank, he said softly. I believe I've been waiting for you without knowing it. When he bent to kiss her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Her lips were soft beneath his, her hands tentatively rising to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, and Preston pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Helena's smile was radiant. I think I've been waiting for you too, she whispered. From the doorway came a discreet cough. They turned to find Thomas leaning on his crutches, an amused expression on his face. I came out for some air, he explained, but I see the porch is occupied. Helena blushed deeply, but Preston kept his arm firmly around her waist. Your sister and I were just discussing the future, he said evenly. Thomas grinned. So I gathered. And has this discussion reached any conclusions I should know about? Helena looked up at Preston, then back to her brother. I believe it has, she said with quiet confidence. Thomas nodded approvingly. Then I'll leave you to continue your discussion. With a wink, he turned and made his way back inside. When they were alone again, Preston took both Helena's hands in his. I want to do this properly, he said. Court you as you deserve with your brother's blessing. I'd like that, Helena replied, her eyes shining. Though I think we're well past the beginning stages of courtship already. Preston laughed, drawing her close once more. Perhaps you're right. We did things rather out of order, didn't we? Life and death before even a proper introduction. I wouldn't change it, Helena said softly. Not one moment. The following weeks saw Thomas Armstrong establish himself in Montezuma, accepting a position at the town's small bank while renting rooms above the general store. Helena returned to teaching, but now rode to and from the schoolhouse with Preston whenever possible, their courtship progressing under the approving eyes of the community. By October, with aspen leaves turning golden across the mountainsides, Preston proposed properly, presenting Helena with a modest diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. They were married in Montezuma's small church in November, with Thomas giving the bride away and the schoolchildren forming an honor guard outside the church, tossing flower petals as the newly wedded couple emerged. The winter of 1875-1876 was harsh, with heavy snows isolating the ranch for weeks at a time. But in the warm farmhouse, Helena and Preston discovered the joys of married life, developing rhythms and routines that suited them both. Helena continued teaching, riding with Preston through snowdrifts to reach her students, while also learning the business of ranching from her husband. Spring brought renewal to the land and to their lives. On a warm May morning, almost exactly a year after Preston had pulled Helena from the river, she woke him with news that left him speechless with joy. They were expecting a child. Standing on the porch that evening, his hand resting protectively on Helena's still flat stomach, Preston marveled at how completely his life had changed in a single year. "What are you thinking?" Helena asked, leaning back against his chest. "I'm thinking about fate," he replied, his lips brushing her temple. "About how the river that nearly took you from this world before we even met instead carried you to me." Helena turned in his arms, her face solemn. "I lost everything in that river, or so I thought. But in truth, I found everything." She placed her hand over his heart. "You didn't just breathe life back into my lungs that day, Preston. You breathed life back into my soul." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Preston held his wife close, thanking whatever providence had led him to the river that fateful morning. In saving Helena, he had ultimately saved himself from a lifetime of solitude, finding instead a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them. In December of that year, Helena gave birth to a robust son they named William Thomas Xavier, honoring both Preston's father and Helena's brother. Thomas, now a respected figure in Montezuma's business community, took his role as uncle seriously, bringing gifts and stories each time he visited the ranch. As the years passed, the Xavier family grew to include a daughter, Elizabeth Martha, and another son, James Preston. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Helena's Eastern education complementing Preston's practical knowledge. Together they weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated bountiful years, and raised their children to appreciate both books and the land. And each spring, on the anniversary of their meeting, Preston and Helena would ride to the river, no longer a place of tragedy but a symbol of their beginning where death had given way to life, and where two souls, like tributary streams, had joined to form something stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone.